theme for tonight is Hopeton, which is one of the 24 or 25 earthworks we've got here in Ross County, all associated with the Hopewell culture peoples. And we're going to start it off with some insights into what it is these people may have been interested in observing and figuring out how best to and when observe it. Does that make sense? Here we go. Here's Brett.
Hey everybody. Nice. So yeah, we're going to talk about Hopeton, and in particular we're going to talk a bit about the ArchaeoAstronomy of the Hopeton works. And of course, probably all of you know that the Hopeton Earthworks is directly across the river here, just maybe 3 miles away, an hour's walk away, practically within shouting distance of that place. In fact, I really think of Hopeton and Mound City, and probably Shriver Circle, as components of one big ceremonial landscape that probably all function together. And people who had, the people who lived and built these places probably participated in ritual at all three of those places contemporaneously. And you know, recently Mound City and Hopeton have become part of the our newest UNESCO World Heritage site. And one of the reasons for that is because these earthworks are not only monumental in scale, they are geometrically precise. There's geometrically perfect circles and squares, octagons that are incorporated into these sites. And they're also astronomically aligned. They're aligned to cycles of the sun and the moon on the horizon. And that's what I'm going to try and explain with these flags here, is a bit of that, of those cycles. So Hopeton is aligned to both the annual solstice cycle and a long 18.6-year lunar cycle. And to explain sort of what maybe people 2,000 years ago were observing, and I'm going to use these flags. I'll wager that most of you most of you probably understand the solstice cycle, but I'll wager that most of you have no understanding of this lunar cycle because it's incredibly difficult to observe and takes a lot of careful observation. I certainly had no knowledge of this until very recently, and right now we're approaching the culmination of that 18.6-year cycle. So I've been paying closer attention to it than I ever have over the past about a year. I've been trying to observe this thing, and it's difficult to observe. Weather gets in the way, the time of day, the phase of the moon, any number of reasons why it's hard to observe. So it's remarkable that 2,000 years ago, the American Indian people who built these places were well aware of all this. So let me just get started. So to understand the solstice cycle, I'm going to use these pink flags. And if you were to, looking east here, you know, at this time of year, it's difficult to see because of the trees, but there's actually a really dramatic skyline there. The Mount Logan range has a lot of variability from Sugarloaf Mountain down to Mount Logan. There's peaks and valleys and such, and that makes it really relatively easy to observe the movements of the sun, the sunrise on the horizon, because you've got those landmarks to watch it against. You know, that's not true in a lot of places. You go much farther north into the Till Plains, and you know, you don't have that dramatic horizon to be measuring things against. So it's possible, and in fact, Mound City and Hopeton are sort of uniquely situated in the Scioto Valley in a place where that dramatic horizon, you know, might have something to do with why these earthworks are here, because people were watching these movements.
Brett, everybody's got the handout from the other day, so basically everyone needs to focus on this upper section here because it's a photographic representation basically of a lot of what he's going to show you.
Yeah, so that graphic is showing you those peaks and valleys along that Mount Logan range, and it's also showing you the points that I'm going to be marking with these flags. So the short of it is, for the solstice cycle, if you were to watch the sunrise every morning and take a stick or a flag or something and mark where on the horizon the sun rises, you would notice over the course of a year that the sun marches north towards the summer solstice. And each day it moves a little bit farther north, and then you notice for a period of about a week it stands still. That's what solstice means. In Latin,
It is Latin.
means sun stands still, basically. So you would notice that the sun stops moving for about a week, and you could mark that with a flag or a big monumental post or a monumental earthwork. And then you notice that the sun starts marching its way south again. And all the way until winter, till December, and the sun would again stand still at the winter solstice, southernmost point, or southernmost rise. And you should know though that the same thing's happening on the far horizon with the sun sets. Same thing's happening on both horizons. So that's, you probably all are aware of that. Sun goes south in the winter, moves north in the summer over this annual cycle. And of course you can, by counting the days, you can come up with a calendar. You can predict times for planting, other important ways of dividing up the year. So that's the solstice cycle. And at Hopeton Earthworks, you have a graphic of it there in your package there. So there's a circle and a square, and you'll note that the square, and I say square in quotes because it's really pretty irregular. It's a polygon, but it has a series of gateways in it. And those walls, when originally built, were about 12 feet tall. So the gateways would have been, really dramatic ways of marking positions on the highway or positions on the horizon. And if you look, for example, the summer solstice sunset is marked by two gateways at corners of that Hopeton Square. From the southeast corner to the northwest corner, across that diagonal of the square, that marks the northernmost sunset. So the summer solstice sunset is built into the design of that earthwork. And many other alignments. This is only showing a fraction of them. And I have to credit a guy named Christopher Turner for discovering this at Hopeton. Some of this work with ArchaeoAstronomy was first discovered in really the early 1980s. Ray Hively and Bob Horn were two professors, one astronomer, one philosopher, who got interested in the Newark earthworks, and they started trying to test the idea that these earthworks were aligned. And they did quite a lot of work at Newark, at the Newark Octagon up there. It was Chris Turner who started at about the same time looking at the Hopeton work and wondering whether it was similarly aligned. And sure enough, it is, to all of the solstices and this long lunar cycle that I'm going to try to explain now. All right, so we've talked about this annual cycle. The moon does a similar thing on the horizon. You watch the moon rise every day. You notice it marches back and forth across the horizon, but on a monthly scale. So if you watch the moon rise each day over the course of a month, for 2 weeks it'll move to the north, and it will eventually reach a northernmost standstill point, and it'll stand still for a couple days, and then it starts marching south for two weeks, and eventually it will reach a southernmost point. So every month the moon oscillating back and forth across the horizon like that. I'll wager most of you have never noticed that. I never had until I started paying attention to it. And so if you watch that month after month after month after month, year after year after year, you notice that if you were marking it with flags or something, you would notice that the width of that spread actually changes from month to month. And if you watched it for literally decades, you would notice that there is one month in which the moon sweeps all the way past the solstice and again back to the south all the way past the solstice. And you would notice that that's the farthest it ever gets. That is the 18.6 year cycle. That is the major lunar standstill where during that month, and it's not a single month. It's actually maybe almost 18 months. It's really a season where the moon really makes that super wide sweep. And it's been doing that. It's doing it right now. For about the last 12 months or so, the moon has been rising and setting beyond the solstice points at the extremes of its cycle. And if you kept watching it year after year, decade after decade, you would notice that there's one month in which it moves a very small distance, a minimum distance, and that's called the minor lunar standstill. And so if you were to mark all those points on the horizon, you'd end up with something like this. And again, it's happening on the set side as well. So these are all sort of targets on the horizon for measuring this 18.6 year cycle and annual cycles. And these are the things that Indian people were building into these earthworks 2,000 years ago. So they would have been able to recognize you're only going to see the major lunar standstill every 18.6 years. Maybe twice, 3 times in your lifetime, probably not see 4 of them. And it's a remarkable thing that it would take generations of recording this and transmitting that knowledge from generation to the next before anybody even noticed it and could confirm that, yeah, that's a pattern that repeats itself. But we know that Hopewell people knew this 2,000 years ago. In fact, there's good evidence that this was known in the Americas at a place called Poverty Point, which is another World Heritage Site. It was built probably 1,500 years before Hopewell, 3,500 years ago in northeast Louisiana. And we know that it continues again at a place called Cahokia that was built about 1,000 years after these Hopewell sites. That's a site near St. Louis of the Mississippian time period. So American Indian people were tracking this generation-long cycle from 3,500 years ago at Poverty Point up through Hopewell and into Cahokia. And really, as far as we know, there are very few other places in the world where anybody is tracking this. And that's one of the reasons why these sites have been recognized as World Heritage Sites. That's globally significant because there are very few places in the world where people had this knowledge, let alone encoded it into monumental geometric earthworks like they did here. So that's my attempt to explain that cycle. I am willing to entertain questions.
You did a good job.
You did an excellent
I
job.
understand it. Yeah.
All right.
Very good.
And
Yeah.
if there are no other questions, there are a couple things we'll do outside before we go in.
If anybody doesn't have any more announcements, I'll turn the floor back over to Gary and
Thank you, Rich. Thank you all for your announcements. I think you're going to find tonight's presentation rather interesting. I know it's just been mind-bogglingly interesting to me, if there is such a word. I was talking to Bret before we actually got started this evening, and I'm an artifact person, and I really like paleo artifacts, and I've been that way for years and years, even though I've been associated with Mound City since we moved here in 1977. I've been coming out here for all kinds of things. We had the Robert L. Harness lecture series. Every time there was a dig going on in town, there would be 20 field school students in here amongst the rest of us. They were great days, and missed that, but I really took the mounds and the earthworks for granted. But in the last couple years, I'm really getting turned on by what this phenomenon was all about. And so many things that I've taken for granted, I'm now looking at with fresh eyes. And one of those things I want to challenge you, you may not get to do it tonight, but at any time you're driving up 104, once you reach CCI, start looking across the Scioto and take stock of that Mount Logan Ridge. It is so special.
Yeah, that awesome photograph by Michael
This is
Greer.
Mount Logan Ridge, and this is courtesy of Michael. And we were all involved in a little project which we'll share snippets of. So this is not just the Gary show, this is going to be contributions by Bret and by Michael and other people that can chime in anytime here, but I think you're going to find this very special. But there aren't many places in Ross County where you can set up and have a view like this and use this as a tool for keeping track of what's going on in your version of astronomy. You know, not the Western scientific version, but the prehistoric version. And we're still working, as Bret says, to try to get a grasp of what all they're trying to accomplish by setting up these alignments, whatever, but they're definitely tuned in to this ridge in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if you pay attention, you can pretty well guess within a week or so of when Mike took that photograph there, just by looking at where the sun is against that Mount Logan Range.
So what is the Mount Logan Ridge? What is it geologically?
Is it? It's the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains.
Well, Rich here will give you some insight. So what's its construction? What type of sandstone is it?
Oh, sandstone? The Mississippian.
It's part of the Mississippian escarpment that goes all the way to Circleville.
Yeah.
And Snake Den is on that.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So it's very, very special. And we have other sandstone ridges. But
Now, the Illinois Glacier covered that whole mountain.
Well,
that's incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. But it stopped on the hills farther east. But the reason why that mountain's still there is because of that Mississippian sandstone that's in the upper layers of like the Logan. That's why that's still there. Now, the Wisconsin didn't go over that mountain. But
The earlier ones
the
did.
Illinois did.
do you think any of the previous glaciations? I
Oh.
can't find any evidence that any of the previous ones got that far.
I don't know, the Kansan and then what was before the Kansan?
Well, the Nebraskan and the Iowa, and
Oh,
Nebraskan and the, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
I know, probably not, I would say.
And the hard thing is, it's like the world's largest bulldozer, and anything that an earlier glacier did was redone over and over again by later glaciers. So it's just really hard to track that kind of information, extract it from.
But one of the things to remember is this valley here below those, that Scioto Valley, it caught everything, practically every glacier, all the outwashes every time they receded. It changed constantly. Over all those glaciers, it caught everything.
This is really it was a difficult thing to pull together because I ended up with Barney passing away and the funeral and the calling hours and all of that. And scores of emails and other contacts that I got and had to answer and deal with. And you know, I was glad to do that, but it took a lot of time. And
Sorry, Lord.
we ended up with 5 or more or less days in our cycle from last month's meeting to this one, and so I ended up not being able to find someone who had enough time to put together a PowerPoint. So this is the thing that I begged Bret if he would help me, and we were going to build off of some things we've done and also some things that Michael and I have done, and I have found them interesting, and I think you will too, so stick with us, and I think this is going to be good. And we're going to try to do this in parts, and I'm going to pull one of these for myself here. We'll lose this once we go to the next slide. So you'll see what this is all about as we go here. So. Part 1, the Hopeton Earthwork Complex. What in the heck is it? What do we know about it? So as it says down in the corner there, this is floating around on the internet. It's floating around in some of the National Park Service's literature. Nobody knows for sure exactly where it came from.
Yes.
Some people are suggesting it could be a woodcut printed in Harper's Weekly.
Was Squire did a series of articles around just before the Civil War, right around the beginning of the Civil War, and this is one of the illustrations.
And Harper's began in 1857, so that might be about the time this would have appeared. So it's not early, but it's still way before most of the archaeology gets underway here in Ross County. And to kind of orient you with this, the red dotted line, or whatever you want to call that, that is the so-called square. And like Bret, I like to think of that square in quote marks. Chris Turner, actually, he calls it a pentagon. He doesn't even call it a square. It's got rounded corners. It isn't always square in the corners. Some of the corners have windows or gates in them, others do not. And then you've got the big circle protruding into this quote square. Plus you've got two 250-foot in diameter circles, one nearly protruding into it, and another one which is protruding into it. And this one even has an embankment on the inside, almost like a platform in these early drawings. And then there are some associated mounds as well. This is the earliest map I've been able to find showing the Hopeton Works, and Bret has found it as well. Luckily, I'm a good record keeper. I'm not the most organized person, but give me some time and I can find stuff that I've had access to. Bret and I, actually, whether he remembers or not, started exchanging emails regarding early maps of any earthworks here in Ross County, and this began in September of 2014. I have a whole series of about 15 emails where we traded maps that we had found, and we traded ideas about who might have made them and whatever. So, and we were saying before the meeting tonight, this is something that most people, everybody starts with Squire and Davis, and they don't realize this stuff goes back. There were people mapping this out within 10 years of the establishment of Chillicothe. And that's incredible. The first mention of a mound is a 1797 letter from Thomas Worthington to his wife Eleanor, who's back in Virginia. And he says, "I've just bought 4 lots downtown Chillicothe, and you'll never believe this, one of the lots has a big old 30-foot Indian mound in the back of it. And we're going to put a summer house up there for ventilation. We'll sit up there and we'll watch the city and life go by up there." So people are already fascinated with it. And I have tried to figure out what that says underneath there, but we know that this has got to be at least by 1809, and it may be earlier.
There's a transcription of it in my book.
Well, I wish I'd have known that before I transcribed it. So we're going to look at what's under the circle and the square first, and I left out numbers of poles in most places, but basically it says the above forts are situated on fractional section number 1 and township number 1 of range number 22, Worthington survey. So they're basing this on a survey that Worthington had done. And I also, and the OHC also has in its records an early plat map survey that was done for Worthington and all the lands that he owned around Adena. And so I don't know if they're referring back to that or not, but something to keep in mind as a possibility. Notes of the square fort beginning where it joins the circular fort on the east side from them, so many poles across the large gate, so many poles to the southwest corner, so many poles to the southeast corner, excuse me, so many poles to the southwest corner, from which is 60 poles to the Scioto River. And then so many more poles to the northwest corner, 19 poles where it joins the circular fort on the west side. The small circular forts, those two circles on the easternmost end of the square, they contain about an acre each. Boy, it took me forever to figure out that word each. It looked like it was 3 letters. Yes?
What is the size of a pole?
Anybody have any surveying, early surveying?
16 feet,
How much?
16 feet.
Yeah, something like that.
16 feet, yeah. So, and then the drawing itself was laid down according to a scale of 30 poles to an inch. So 30 times 16 equals an inch on the size of this. And I don't know how large the original was, I have no idea. But it's a very well drawn map. Yes, Jack?
How did they measure height in those days?
I don't think anybody tells us, do they? Do you think they put a pole on top and then a rod up next to it and measure?
That's the only thing I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, they had these little telescopes.
Yeah.
Oh, like
And-
the survey peepers.
Yep, and they had a kind of a degree marking measurement on them, so as you rotated them, if you moved it up or down, you could tell how many degrees up or down, and you could calculate based on the distance how big something was.
And see, this is what I like about this meeting that we're going to have tonight, because we've got so many different types of expertise in our group here. And there's no place that any of you that do not feel like you're an expert, although you may well still be, there's no place where you can gather and hear opinions, ideas, knowledge from experts in rivers, glaciers, surveying, all of this. And
Those little telescopes, they called them transits, and they were
Yes.
also used for navigation purposes, so.
makes sense.
But I have a handheld one, and it has a level in it. You can sight through and you can see the level, and you get the mark, you pick a point. If you go there, you can just walk right up a mountain, tell how many eye heights it is. Basically, you do, when you're surveying, you get your eye height. Mine was 5.5 feet. So I would just 5.5 times the number of that.
And see, I'm an educator, 31 years as a high school teacher, and I can tell you that we tend to learn what we need to learn, and other things we kind of store it in there, and then we take it for granted, and a lot of times we need to either relearn what we stored in there, or we need to dig deep and learn about it again. And when I was doing stuff with getting ready for the Solstice event that we did out at Hopeton, I was trying to figure out what in the heck is a gibbous waning moon? What is a gibbous waxing moon? And I know those terms were thrown out in one of my science classes in the 8th grade or whatever, but I'm never going to use this, get enough to get by on the test and move on with life. And it's the same with this Mount Logan range over there. I've seen it since 1977 every day of my life, and I just have taken it for granted as to how wonderful it really is. And what a useful tool it provided for the early peoples living around here. So moving on now. Interestingly though, or sadly, there's no mention of the height or the width when this map was made. Then underneath the little circle, which has the parallel walls, which is interesting in and of itself because a lot of these early survey maps show a totally different version of what's going on with those parallel walls. So, but this is a at least an 1809 or earlier version. And in that little box it says, a stone was erected in the center of the above fort. And again, all of these were fort to these people. It was 4 feet high, with 4 feet 4 inches square, and so says, and it was someone named Kreider, but I couldn't read his first name. Were you able to read it?
I think it's in there. This is like another copy of a map. I have a different version that's in my book, but it's the same text. So you can kind of look at it.
So they had a stone erected right here.
The map version I have actually shows the stone in the circle. It actually
So it
has
was like this square, 4 feet high.
Yeah.
So some kind of a marker.
Who put it there?
Who knows?
It was there when
All
they
who knows
came
that
upon it.
So Kreider attested that it was there. He described it. And this is, like we say, around 1809. And then, over here, across the Scioto, there's a reference to this big old circle, which we are pretty sure is, everybody?
Shriver Circle.
Shriver Circle, which is right down the road, right off where, what's the name of the road that goes off the intersection? Takes you to
Moundville Road.
Yoga. What's it called, Mound Road?
Moundville.
Moundville Road, yeah. So that is actually built possibly right about here is where that is, and the rest of this extends completely across 104 and into the prison yard over there. And Jared Burke risked his life, I would assume, going over there and getting a magnetometry survey done. And that is described as the above fort is on Robert Smith's land. So now we know who owned that land in 1809. It wasn't Thomas Worthington, even though it's shown on that plat, the village plat map I have of the Worthington estate. And it's a small mound. It has a small mound in the center of it, about 10 feet high. And the bank of the fort appears to be the same height. So Shriver Circle was had 10-foot high walls around it. That's pretty impressive. Again, I don't think there's any description like that in Squire Davis. So.
No.
Then, the next map we come across is in a publication that dates to 1809. So, and it seems to be, in Bret's opinion, and I agree with him, and hopefully I'm not speaking for Bret, but I think we've exchanged this. This seems to be based on that earlier map that we looked at. And it's it's entitled The Remains of an Ancient Work Found on the Scioto River, District of Chillicothe, Walls 6 feet in height. So this tells us that the walls at Hopeton were 6 feet tall. And it's written to, I don't remember the name of the real editor, but the editor of the magazine that this was published in went by the pseudonym Mr. Old School. He wrote this, and Bret and I exchanged a lot of email ideas on this, and do you agree with me that that's probably John D. Clifford?
I'm not going to pin myself down. It could be, there's another guy named John Pope Campbell.
Okay, so, but was he also friends with Rothanesk?
Indeed.
So there was the circle of guys associated with Transylvania University down in Kentucky at this time that are exploring all of the mounds and earthworks and exchanging ideas and writing this up in 1809. So again, way before Squire Davis, way before Caleb Atwater as well.
So this is CSR's rendering. Raffinesque drew this.
We don't know. We don't know who drew
No,
it.
this is copied off of the prior map
Right.
that you saw.
It's like a stick version, stick figure version of the other map. And but something's different about it. What do you notice that's different? I'll show you in the next slide here. Map and description are found in an 1809 article entitled Ruins on the Scioto by J.C. Is it Clifford or not? On page 19 of issue 5 of volume 2 in the monthly magazine at that date, in those days known as the Portfolio. And John Rummel, who's very well known in Ohio archaeological circles, he's one of the big dudes in the ASO. He thought he'd found a big insight here, so he published in the Ohio Archaeologist on page 11 of issue 2 in volume 59 that he thinks he's found the earliest known map of the Hopeton Earthworks. And he didn't know about the map that we saw first of all here. So he's a little behind there, but he at least got the word out that this existed, and that put people on the trail to look for any other maps that might be this substance for this one. And as I said, Brett and I began exchanging emails about all of this way back in 2014. So that's all just background for where we're going here. So if we compare JC's map to Squire and Davis's map, and they did this map in 1845, even though the work itself, the Monuments of the Mississippi, was published in 48. This survey was done in 45. So what do you notice that's different about the two maps?
Small circle.
Well, there's a couple things.
Yeah, look at the orientation.
First of all, the orientation is,
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Secondly, the extended pathway that is shown from the circle on the one on the left, from the intersection of the circle and square on the right.
I don't see any gates in the circle at the intersection on the one on the left, on the one on the right, rather.
And there are gates to the two small circles above the square and the one to the right.
Right there are
also.
gates.
Or are they?
Yes. It's just kind of blends in with the shading that they did there. But, so,
Yeah, I don't see.
even though these are early, there's still some things that need to be reconciled. And,
Oh, there's a small circle.
yeah,
Pathway.
yeah. And this one ends in a circle and this one does not. So we'll explore that a little further as we go here. So we need to tilt the map that JC did, and we're sort of in line with what's really there. And what you have to picture is now, this is oriented, the square is oriented more to the east, which is where the Mount Logan range is in the distance. And we've got true north there up at the top. So let's talk about the alignments. Part 2, the Hopeton alignments and the Mount Logan range. So if we take Squire and Davis's version, which is one almost everybody knows about, even though it's got this and it doesn't have, excuse me, this, it seems to be oriented correctly. Whereas if you compare Squire and Davis's version of the Liberty Earthworks, it's way off. But they got this one right. If you look at the right half of the screen here, you'll see a close-up of just this part here. And for alignment purposes, way back in 1885, James Middleton and Gerard Fouke, or Fouke, I wasn't around then to know for sure how he pronounced it, but around 1885, they were commissioned to go to Hopeton and figure out where all the gates were and to assign a tracking set of numbers for them. And Michael and I, when we first started to work on a project out there about a month ago, well, how in the heck did they come up with this numbering system? It goes from 1 to 39 to 7 to 10 north and 10 south. But people like Hidley and Horn and Christopher Turner have been using these gate numbers or these observation point numbers as they're trying to figure out where all the alignments lie and what they're pointing to. So basically, I don't think of this as an observatory. I think of this as like a rifle with a sight on the end of it, and I'm looking down that sight to see where there's going to be some heavenly event, whether it's going to be a sunrise, a moonrise, or a special version of those things. And I'll come to it, but Christopher Turner, he has done the most work with this, as you will see here. Oh, he's coming up next. So Christopher Turner's work at Hopeton, and if you want to read up on this stuff, it's on the internet, it's easy to find. Type in Christopher Turner, an astronomical interpretation. I'll bet you if you even just put Hopeton in there, you will be able to access his writings. He's very generous with sharing his research. Now, I believe he was a teenager. I actually talked to him personally by phone. I think he told me he was like 17 years old the first time he came to Chillicothe. He became enamored with all the earthworks that he'd heard about. And then he came back in 1983 and focused in on, come on in, Diana, good to see you. Focused in on Hopeton. And his time there, he was able to demonstrate that the Hopeton Earthworks encode various sunrise and moonrise patterns, including the summer and winter solstices, equinoxes, cross-quarter days, which we'll talk about if you've never heard of that, lunar maximum events, which is what Bret was talking about outside the maximum and minimum events. And in 1983, he was able to deduce sighting lines, 17 of them for rises and 11 of them going to the west for sets. Moon rises and moon sets and sunrises and sunsets. He then found out about GIS, and he was able to use this computer system and overlay these earlier maps. And when he did that, he found 22 more sight lines. And so he claims now that there are 50 different solar lunar events that are being pointed to by, if you know how to use the sight lines. 50. And he's very readable. If you want to read him online, I would suggest that. And one of the things that he is overwhelming, he has so much material that he's interested in. And here Gary just has finally taken an interest in this, as I say, and Bret himself will say he feels like a kid coming to this stuff too. So I have focused on something called the cross-border events. And this is something I knew zero about. And what I found out is this is something that's worldwide. In ancient times, people basically saw the world in 4 seasons per year, and we do today. But in certain climates, you find out, wow, we're just into winter. When is spring coming? And you mark, we're halfway there. And so in halfway between winter and spring is a cross-quarter sunrise. And that's what they're looking for. Now, do we observe this today? Heck yes, that's Groundhog's Day. We don't realize it's disguised as Groundhog's Day, but that's what that is. And they were doing this in the Middle Ages. The Celts were doing it. These tribes that Julius Caesar warred against back in 60 BC. So it's a very, very old thing. Chris Turner found evidence these people were definitely looking for this cross-quarter events. And he said, actually, if you look at the northernmost wall of the square and the southernmost wall, because they are fixed to a northern cross-quarter event, that's the only way they could lay that square out. That's why they had to put the circle in the way they put it in. So he says the contorted version of the square and the circle bulging into it, that's because they set this up with those cross-quarter events in mind. And that's an interesting proposition. So just as a summary, the cross-quarter sunrises mark the midpoints between winter, spring, summer, fall, and those are your target dates, but you've got 5 or 6 days on either side easily that you can observe these. Yes?
I know what days are celebrated with everything except August 1st.
It's a Celtic one. I didn't know it either, but it goes back to some kind of a Celtic feast. So Halloween, that's another one of them. May Day, go around the maypole.
Yeah, done that.
So this is one of the maps that Chris has in one of his articles, and I want to give him total credit. I didn't get a chance to ask him because this was thrown on me to get this done quickly. But I'm pretty sure he cares enough to get the word out that it's not going to be a problem. I hope, Chris, thank you if you ever see this. I totally respect you. But his work showed that sight lines 5, 7, and 111 point to the north cross-quarter sunrise along the northern slope of Bald Hill. What in the heck is Bald Hill? You need to know those 11 peaks or whatever there are in the distance over there in the Mount Logan range. And they fixed the orientation of that entire structure there, whether you want to call it a polygon or a square or whatever. So using that numbering system that Falke and Marshall set up, I've just picked out the exact numbers that show this out of the 39 or 40 or whatever they came up with in 1885. So this corner down here is 1, this is 11, so that's a 111 sight line, and this corner to that corner is a 5-7 sight line. Hope that all makes sense. What are they pointing to? So, a great shot. Michael took this one too. I tried to get one that's nice, but this is the best. So you can see all of the different peaks, and I actually have them coordinated with their names up above there. And if I knew how, if I were a computer person, I would be able to take my doctored up PowerPoint version of this and make copies for you. I tried it, I couldn't, it didn't come out. So, but I think that's a very useful tool there when you're trying to study these earthworks.
Gary, back in the day, there was a peak out there around Kenneconek that pretty much was taken out by the gravel company. Oh, my dad lived in Kenneconek, and he said it was almost as big as Mount Logan.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've lost so much of our prehistory by the loss of the mounds and the earthworks, and we don't realize that maybe they were coordinated with features on the landscape that we're now removing too, and so we keep getting further and further away from being able to understand what this was all about in the minds of peoples like the Hopewell. And then, we'll get to this, there's some talk that through this corridor right here might be, if there was such a thing, where the Great Hopewell Road came in from Newark, and that it may have been set up so that it would take you to Hopeton. But I can't prove that, I just know that's what.
So is that looking northeast?
This is basically almost due east. Yeah.
And so what were you talking about?
So right through this gap, and here's where the Hopewell Road, if it does exist, could have come through. And I'll mention some of the people that are doing work on that. I'll give you some names.
Was the Hopewell, I'm confused. 'Cause
Well, I'll show.
Newark is east.
Pardon?
Newark is northeast.
Well, the road doesn't necessarily run in a straight line.
Okay,
It's
you're
gonna-
saying, yeah.
It's going to follow the terrain. and
Not a
stuff.
nice straight road like
Right.
the highway running.
And that's part of the problem with proving whether or not it exists, because how could you ever archaeologically excavate from here to Newark in the wide swath of the terrain there to find the traces of this?
Okay.
That's the big problem. So people can propose it existed, but it's one of those things that's
Was it walled the whole
intangible.
way?
We don't know that either, see? Did the terrain always allow for walls? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It didn't, and so therefore, we don't know what we're looking for in some places. I think that's the best way to say. Now, thanks to LiDAR and magnetic surveys and things like that, the Park Service has been doing creative mowing. And this interpreted creative mowing shows us exactly the footprint of Hopeton. So here you can see the circle in one of the gates. I don't see any gates really clearly over there, but I thought there was one there and one there in Squire Davis's map. And then here you can see the square or the polygon or whatever you want to call that. And the other feature you need to keep in mind is this is a true orientation line here. That is an east-west running farm lane. So anytime you're out there in that area, you can get your bearings just by tuning into that farm lane.
So the line of trees along the top is the river side?
Yeah. Basically, how would you describe what happened there, Brett? You know, again, there's a railroad bed up there.
railroad. Yeah, so this is looking east
Yeah,
towards
the railroad towards
Adena
where you guys
Hospital.
are at, yeah. See, that's the range, and that's the Mount Logan Range to the east in the background.
Okay.
And it's like
Yeah.
4.5 miles long, if you think about that as a feature of
That's a
it.
Hopewell place out there on Hopetown?
Yeah, this is
Yep.
Hopewell, yes.
Okay. Yeah,
So where are the two small circles?
One's
Oh, okay, I see
touching,
them, yeah.
one's touching and one isn't.
Yeah, and they were set up purposefully that way. And this is pretty accurate, wouldn't you say, Brett?
Yeah, that mowing pattern is really following the results of a magnetic survey that we did with the German Archaeological Institute. And it faithfully follows what we saw magnetically. So, for example, those gateways, earlier mapped gateways in the circle, we didn't see them magnetically, so we didn't mow them out. So this is, yeah, so there's different representations of this thing out there. This one is most faithful to the magnetic signature of it.
But whatever, it represents the actual footprint of all the earlier maps. You can say that about it. So it is boots on the ground where the circle and square stood.
You would say that the most intact part of the earthwork is along the center where the circle and the polygon kind of come together, right?
Yeah, I think so, because
Because you
there was
see
a
the fence.
fence line
Yeah.
that ran across the junction of the circle and square, since it was first plowed, that fence line was probably never disturbed, and so all the best preserved pieces of it are right along that line.
Because they couldn't plow over that area where the fence ran.
The boys that used to farm that.
All right, don't want to keep you here till midnight. So, Michael and I, and with the encouragement of Chris Turner, decided we are going to try to see how this works in relation to the May cross-quarter sunrise. And so we went out the week this was going to happen during the daylight hours, because sunrise is right at that cusp. This is broad daylight. And we're looking east to west, so this is east. In fact, this lane actually goes through the southernmost wall of the square. And that tree line back there, Jack, that's where your Scioto River is. And in the distance...
Yeah, I recognize that.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure everybody's got their bearing. I took this picture, so I'm going to give myself credit. And we're going to enhance things now here. So we wanted to get familiar with the 111 sight line along the south wall of the square. So I've highlighted that south wall in dark green.
That looks like that section is raised.
This is not level ground. They could have chosen a more ideal place.
Well, like I'm looking out here, is down through here, it looks like
Yeah,
it's raised up.
that's the plowed down earthwork wall that was
Yeah.
once 12 feet tall, and now it's
Wow.
about 6 feet tall. It was originally 50 feet broad, 12 feet tall. Now it's 150 feet wide and 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely pick it out. Right now, it's mowed short. It's a great time to go out there and see it.
When was that plowed last?
Probably about, well, maybe as recently as 1990s.
But just think, if you're plowing over that with the deep plow equipment that they had in the 80s and 90s and up to the present, they are busting dirt and it is scattering. And
Yeah.
But isn't there a gate blocking that road?
Yeah, you can't drive in there.
Right.
Yeah. But what you do is you park in the parking lot and you can access it through the trees over here, and it's not that far of a walk. But Michael and I survived it. So. All right, moving along. So, about May the 3rd, Mike and I, we met out there at dark 30 and went to the parking lot, and we came in basically here, and there's already a glow in the distance. Get familiar with these peaks. That's Sugarloaf, and that's Bald Hill. And we knew that this event is supposed to take there, so I'm thinking, we've got to get up to that wall, the mowed version of the wall, and we've got to get ourselves set up. It was a voyage of discovery, so to speak. We found out limitations, and there are all kinds of limitations that we discovered that the Hopewell would have faced as well, and we're going to try to raise those as we go along. So here I am at the very back of that southmost wall, and there's a dinosaur cloud running along there. This is Tyrannosaurus Rex, in case you can't recognize it. And we can see the glow, but what in the heck is the problem? Here we are along the sight line looking for Bald Hill and Sugarloaf, and what do we see? A grade and trees. And that grade would have been there, although it's been modified by the B&O Railroad that went through there. That grade is still pretty much the way it would have been in prehistoric times. So this is not set up for you to stay there, at ground level at least, especially if you've got 12-foot high walls. Or did they have stations on top of the walls? But according to Chris Turner's calculations, it's not necessarily right on the wall. Sometimes it's on the left corner of the wall, or the north corner of a wall, or the south corner of a wall.
Got to cut those trees down, right?
I don't think you can still see it. So Michael and I, we got to there and we go, heck, fire, it's 5:30 and it's going to be up, it's supposed to be up about 5:35. So we Mach Schnelled up the lane there, went over the railroad tracks and looked for a spot to take some pictures. And this is what we saw from a cornfield in the distance. So there's Sugarloaf and Bald Hill again. And look at that beautiful glow of, we're just waiting in anticipation. We want to see that orb crest in that little peak right there, in between the peaks. And this is where we learned things that the Hopewell would have been up against, even if they had a better spot than we did. First of all, we don't think about this, but the sun and the moon do not rise straight up off of the horizon in Ohio.
Right.
What you have to do is figure out what the angle that the sun's going to come up, and you take your local latitude, which in Chillicothe is 39.4 degrees, subtract that from 90 degrees, and the sun is going to rise at a 60.6 degree angle. So we were anticipating it's going to come here, and by the since it's already just gleaming right there, and we project it, the sun's probably going to start rising there, traveling this direction. We didn't find out. Why? Cloud covers. Clouds were just so difficult to deal with, and if we're dealing with them, we know the ancients would have been dealing with us as well. Michael, can you give us a perspective on how far away these clouds are? It's got a, but just the figures on it.
Depending on the weather, those clouds you see over there, over top of the mountain, probably over in West Virginia, maybe in Virginia.
Yeah.
So
it could be a clear day here.
So, yeah, like some days I'm out there and it's beautiful blue here, but I can look at the satellite imagery from National Weather Service. You can see where the clouds are, you can see where storms are, if it's a thunderstorm, and you know how tall they are, 60,000 feet or whatever those clouds, cumulus clouds roll up to. So they block these things. So it's got to be clear in Illinois and Indiana. It doesn't make any difference what's here in Ohio above me, or West Virginia and Virginia. I can't remember if we looked that morning, but.
We didn't that morning.
Right.
Because we tried 3 days in a row, and every time it would inch its way up, and then the clouds would take over.
Right. If it's cloudy here, it's a beautiful thing, because the sun is raking across all the clouds, and the sky will just go crazy red. And then you see the sunrise, the sky is crazy, but if it's cloudy out there, you're toast.
Yeah, Randy?
You know, a lot of your pictures, you're standing in cornfields and stuff with a clear view, but with a mature forest, this would even been a lot more difficult.
Well, an interesting thing, and I don't know how far to take this, but the first time we were scouting out there, we bumped into a woman who was walking her dog out there. And she was a scientist who works with the National Park Service, or with Wayne National Park, or National Forest, I should say. Yeah, Wayne National Forest. And we raised that question with her, and she said, my understanding is this would have been a savanna during the Hopewell period.
Yeah.
So again, you can't look at the world through the world we see, where the rivers are, and all of this and that.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see what she's basing that on.
Yeah, I would contest that. There's no evidence of that.
I'm just saying, that's
That
what
was
she
all
said.
grassland?
She
No, it
she
was-
thought it would be, but we're not sure.
We have a pretty good idea.
Okay.
It was hardwood forest.
You go back to the surveys, is where we know that from.
But
Yeah,
I think she was basing
pollen
it on
records and
pollen records, though. I think that's what she was using. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah. But again, the difficulty, and like Randy's saying, what if it was heavily forested, hardwood forest? So we don't know, what other obstacles they faced besides clouds and trees and gee whiz, and timing this and
mean, they didn't
not
know
being
that.
able to drive up in your Jeep. You had to walk this all on foot,
They weren't the Fort Ancient culture with cornfields.
No.
Well, if it was probably some grasslands, there was still some scattered trees.
Sure.
Old growth trees at that. Are you going to talk about back sites?
Yeah, well,
Well,
I thought that's going to be,
I was up to Walkena once, and they had a map on a wall up there at Walkena. You didn't know where Walkena's at, over on the Hocking, in Hocking County. Well, they had a map of what the area looked like or where the tree cover was, and what was grassland, like before they started cutting trees. And all the major valleys in Benton and Jackson County were all grass. and the hills had trees on them, but they said the valleys and the bottoms of the valleys were grass.
Yeah,
And I took it like maybe, well, that's possible, but I kind of doubt it. But all those buffalo trails, trying to get to the Salt Lakes of Jackson, and, well, and the beaver and the bottoms, maybe there were some grass there, but I kind of doubt if they were just like, they look like freaking highways on that map, and I just don't know whether that was really true or not.
So, we're not going to be able to answer this, but like we're saying, it depends on who you ask and what resources they have available to them. And I'm not going to make a call, but I think we've explored what the options are, and it could have been heavily forested, it could have been partially forested on the hillside.
the original surveys will tell you what they use as corners and stuff.
Okay.
It's usually a tree.
Yeah, a white oak or whatever. I've seen a lot of those. All right. Hopefully this is interesting to you, because this is really interesting to me. So, Michael decides he's going to go out there on his own, because 75-year-old Gary, after about 4 or 5 days of going out there at 5 o'clock and staying up till midnight, and then getting back out there, he was a dragon a little bit. But Michael was trying to explore options. If you're not within the earthwork complex itself, where are you supposed to be standing as a backsite to use those portals or gates or walls or corners or whatever, depending on which event you're trying to hone in on? Where do you need to be? And how many different backsites did you explore, Michael?
I don't remember.
At least 5, I know.
Well, I've been to a bunch of different ones, because again, I was a disciple of Dr. Horn. I got to spend some time with Dr. Horn and Nomi and my uncle, and we went around. That's what inspired me to be a backsite guy. I'm not so much into the earthworks itself, other than they're projected somewhere back, whether it's Unionota High School or up at the, almost up to that little schoolhouse along where 104 and 207, that whole terrace across there has got to have, if there's such a thing as a backsite, there's got to be some really cool places up there. Isn't there a Hopewell habitation site over there by the Mace farmhouse? Is that a real thing on the golf course?
I know they find Hopewell Blakeless over there.
I thought Dr. Bowen had told me that at one time.
Actually, I thought that you had, actually, it was Mark Perkins.
So there was one, is there one there, or was there one there? How do we know?
Mark found what he called the Hopewellian hamlet with some, a few points, several bladelets, flint ridge chippage, maybe a piece of mica or two, yes. From a small restricted area.
So there was activity, Hopewell period activity there for sure.
That whole terrace is cool, and that's how I got it.
So, and I'm throwing something out there for everyone, and it doesn't mean I have an insight that's worthy here, but I'll try it. Would that explain why the walls needed to be so tall on the square? So that you'd be able to still sight in on those from a distance instead of...
Did it have to be in alignment? If you're back there, it looked cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
they're not all 10 feet high or 20
my
feet high.
personal take on it is I do not believe that the earthworks were actually observatories. I don't think anybody was actually standing there
No, I don't
sighting through those gateways.
I agree with that.
I think they're probably on high points, making the observations to the horizon from high points, and then they're laying out the earthworks in places they can't even see the earthworks, but they're laying them out along those sight lines. It was important for them to know that the earthworks were aligned with these astronomical features, but I don't think they were observing them.
They're integrating them to the natural environment.
Yeah, and I'm pretty confident that from any of those high points, you cannot see the earthworks. I mean, for a number of reasons, hardwood forest, green on green, there's just no way you're ever going to see it. I mean, one thing that people often say to me is, well, from Spruce Hill, you could see site earthworks.
No.
You can't even see Paint Valley High School from from Spruce Hill. So that idea just does, and all these observations that Mike and Gary made recently convinced me more than ever that that's not what the Indian people were trying to do out there. They were trying to align their world, their ceremonial grounds with the cosmos.
That makes sense. That's a good way to say it.
And they knew, and their goal there was probably to be in accord with that cosmos, to connect with it,
Placate and
harmonize with it. Yeah.
But they wouldn't want to check on their own work.
I mean, they surveyed these things. I mean, there were people who laid them out accurately, but the general populace, I can imagine, never saw those observations being made.
I'm going to show you a film that was made from this spot, but notice that if you follow that alignment line here, Michael should have been standing here when he shot it. And so you don't have to be on that line necessarily to get to the full effect of what's going on here. So watch this, if I can activate it. So how do I do that? So, anyway,
That's like GoPro. I mean, it's like
part 3 out of 5. So, are there also possible links or relationships to other earthworks? So, is there possibly a relationship between Hopeton and what's going on at Newark via connections on this, quote, possibly a great Hopewell Road? And I think I've got a picture of that coming up. And then another thing to think about, right across the Scioto, is there a relationship with Mound City and Schreiber? And I think Bret actually proposed that before we came in. So this is Newark. Where do people get the idea for parallel walls and lanes and a great Hopewell Road? And people were already speculating about that as early as the 1820s. Theo Batwater from Circleville, he looked into these parallel walls and thought, these are going someplace. And I think some people have actually been able to trace them out as much as at least 6 miles from there. I don't know if it's any further than that. But then they lost sight of it. And then as the terrain changes and whatever, Other people to explore this, the Salisbury brothers in the 1860s. Brad Lepper's been working on this for decades. Kevin Schwartz published something on it in 2009, and basically the idea is there's good reason to believe it existed, but there doesn't seem to be any way we can ever prove for sure whether there was such a thing. We've just lost too much before we could ever get it.
Where is it on that map?
I don't know which lane you want to take, but
It's this one here. This is the proposed
Yeah,
one.
that's what I thought, yeah. Thank you.
And if you look at Schreiber and Mound City, were they possible backsites? What was your thought on the relationship there, Brett? Because you've given this a lot more thought.
I mean, I really haven't thought about how they might be aligned along those solar or lunar alignments. I just think that functionally they are related.
Oh, well, yeah, they're part of this world that they've created, and it all centers around placating the forces in the universe and being right with the world.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the talk that I gave you a decade ago when I did that LiDAR work and showed the relationship between Mound City and Hopeton, that you can take the size of Mound City or the size of the polygon at Hopeton, they divide out evenly and they're parallel to one another in the landscape. So it could be very well that there is a backside at Mound City, because they are basically completely in alignment with each other, and they divide out evenly based on the size of those squares. So, I don't know, I can send that stuff to you if you really want to.
Brett, is there? The
We did,
Hopewell
while you're on
and Mound
those,
City are in opposition to each other, or part of one construct?
that's my question.
I personally, I think that it's all part of one planned construct. And I would include actually Cedar Bank. I think Cedar Bank is close enough. There seems to be, it's just one continuous planned structure.
Is there any archaeological evidence of, I don't know what terminology to use for ancient times, boat docks or anything, they would have gone back and forth by canoe. They had lots of travel by canoe. That was the way you traveled back then.
Yeah.
Or other boats. Have they found any wood structures or anything?
We have not. We've done a little bit of looking here at Mound City for the canoe landing. There must have been one, but we didn't find anything convincing. But we didn't look hard enough either. That's something that's still out there.
It just went au natural.
Yeah, there certainly many times you could wait it, but undoubtedly there were canoe landings here and at Hopeton.
You're assuming the river's in the same spot, which my contention is,
Yeah.
in 1800, when this thing was platted, it wasn't where it is today. That's my,
Where was it? Tell us where it was.
it was closer to the earthworks on this side, and on the other side, over by Kramer, the river was up against Kramer, almost. Not quite, depending on which slough it was in. But the one channel over by Kramer, everything on that side was platted with the stuff on the east side of the river. All the plats line up, and at some time, those guys lost those plats. And they've all been reoriented later in time. So the river's all over.
But you can't come very far this way till you're up against these so-called mounds.
I think that on this side of the, the river is farther west now than it was. It was farther east towards the gravel pit. And it may have been, there's a slough right across the gravel pit there.
Yeah.
It could have even been there when those guys were visiting, because I did that 60 times 16, and you're getting like 1,000 feet or something like that, That's real close.
I uncovered, I think, some evidence of a substantial river shift around the time that Squire and Davis were putting together ancient monuments. I found some early drawings and diagrams of where the Cedar Bank earthworks are today, and that in the flats down below that, there was another earthwork down in the bottom. They show one of those long, elongated ones, and then something happens and that whole bottom disappears.
Yeah.
And that's why it doesn't appear in ancient monuments. But they did do a survey before that vanished. And, they just didn't include it after the river changed.
We thought there was something weird out there when Jared Burks and Tim Weaver and a bunch of us, we got permission to go out there and check that out, and we looked there's a drop off there that's not natural. I mean, it's not what you would expect.
I want to know what the wall is behind Kramer.
Yeah.
There's all the levees are down here, and then all of a sudden, right next to Kramer, there's I don't want to get too far off topic, but I want somebody to tell me why that wall is there. Was that part of an earthwork that extended out in there? Because, again, I'm getting way off topic, but there's no artifacts on this one bank until you get down to this, what I call the cracked rock terrace. And it's cracked rock, tons of it comes up and it's all gone. There's no more cracked rock there. And there's that earthwork or wall or whatever it is, and it kind of has two corners on it that head out into the river valley. But
Randy?
One thing I do know about the Scioto is when the Navigator was written, they had some descriptions on tributaries and stuff. And it was it was the same length then, early 1800s, as it is now.
I believe that.
Because I was arguing with someone that said, he said something about all streams have been channelized in Ohio. I said, no, they haven't.
They're all.
So I told him that, and he goes, I stand corrected. But that's interesting that the length of it was the same. Doesn't talk about where it was.
So the thing to take away from this is, again, we've got to be able to get out of 2024 landscape and world if we're ever going to get insights into their world.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but, part 4, it's a small one here. Hopeton as a directional indicator for the summer solstice and the major lunar. And this was an event orchestrated by Bret that we did on the 21st of last month, and well attended. We had 50 people, some from as far away as Cleveland, came down to see this. And the weekend was a roaring success. So again, keep in mind, this is the landscape. There's the mountain ridges in the background.
Rocky Mountain, Mount Logan will have
Oh, okay.
the stuff on top of it that we were talking about.
And this is the target that Bret Ruby set up for June the 21st. And we were trying to find, since we were combining two events that would happen close to each other, we tried to do a solstice sunset and a lunastice moonrise. And we actually had a pretty close calculation as to when it would happen, around 9:22 for the sunset and around 9:42 for the moonrise. And figured out which dates and wall alignments we were going to use, and we started with 50 people and marched them up that gravel lane to the southwest corner of the square and kind of explained some stuff to them about what this was all about. And then, knowing we had to be up to an observation point, our own version of a back site, so that we could see the sunset, we marched everybody up to there, and they spread out their blankets and sat in anticipation. And next slide, what I want you to see. And so here's the south wall. There's the east wall. There's the west wall of the square. And here's one of the gates. And do you number it from here, or do you number it from here, or in the middle, whatever. And there's the other gate. And it's pretty close to coming up along that alignment. But again, is it an observation thing, or is it we're right with the world when this happens? You know, how do we really need to look at that? And that's
Almost.
Are there any post holes lined up at all, like where there may have been a wood hinge sort of thing?
We haven't looked.
Okay.
And then we marched everybody back down to the northwest corner of the square and over to here, so that we could catch where the once every 26 year cycle of moonrises was going to take place. And you say that lasts for several months, basically.
Yes.
So, but we were there on the precise day corresponding to the solstice sunset. Those bales of hay were not there in Hopewell times. Final thoughts on Hopeton. I really feel like every time I talk about this with you folks and Bret and Michael, I walk away with more and more insight.
Confusion.
And well, the more I know how tentative our perceptions of this really are, and how we just need a little bit more here or there that's going to, you know, point us in a different and possibly better direction or whatever here. Hopefully you feel as invigorated mentally as I do. I really thought this went well, and looking forward to any feedback you have.
Clouds. This cloud originated, this is, what night was that when we went there? This was our test night.
Yeah.
And
It's about a week
the
before the
moon came up
21st.
over here, and it's up here now. We kept waiting and waiting, but that cloud, I think it was raining like over in eastern Ohio and then eventually came all the way down there. So anyway, how do I make it go forward? Just hit the button?
Yeah.
There you go. This is, I think this is a video of one of the nights. How do I make it play? There you go. So this is like 20 times original speed or real speed. But this was one of the mornings I was out there and it was bright blue above me, but that was over in like West Virginia or someplace. And you know, it comes up over here and that didn't show itself to there. So I'm just showing you the clouds and how they work.
And that's that 60-degree angle too. It's rising at.
Oops, next slide then.
That's Sugarloaf.
That's Sugarloaf. All right, this one I went out and shot another 302 or whatever it is. And this is a bank of clouds over in Illinois, and we're going to see that. There's a little bit of light stuff up here, and that typically, a lot of that will dissipate as the sun goes down or we get towards evening. Well, this is something a little bit different. Here, same angles for almost 2 weeks. It parks that long. So it's 58 degrees and 302 here this time of year, and then in the wintertime it's going to be 120 and 240. And it's 2 weeks or so. It just parks there. It's in the same spot. Now it's moving 1/10 of a degree or whatever every day. And the longest day doesn't mean it's at the greatest angle because it's kind of moving back and forth. But anyway, enough of that. What do we got here?
Summer solstice sunset.
I forget what I'm going to show you here. But anyway, this is, I must be showing, let's see what's on here.
Sunset.
Summer
I'm
solstice
really confused now.
Yep.
Oh, this is the sun, sunset. This is where we were on our little adventure when we watched that.
Spot, yeah.
So, let's see. All right, so this is where it started, up here. Just like, these are just screenshots out of the video. Sun's up there, we're gonna go to the next one. That's where it's set. We're not anywhere near the gate. And the Hopewell, weren't you telling me this? They're projecting where it should be. Like if we got rid of the hill and you looked out over Santa Monica or someplace like that, that's where it's going.
Yeah.
So you can actually see that in the, that's crazy.
They were conscious.
Now, how much of this is because of precession and stuff is what I want, I mean.
No, it's because their calculations in this case were geared to a 0-degree horizon, as if there was no hill there.
Right.
And no trees, nothing.
Yeah, but if we roll back precession 2,000 years, that's like 20 degrees or something.
It
Precession won't have anything to do with this.
Yeah, it wouldn't make a significant difference.
Two gates. I'm not talking about the hills.
Yeah, no, precession
Or night.
precession affects the background stars. It doesn't really affect sun and the moon and the planets. They're going around the sun. You know, we're going around the sun. Precession doesn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah, but why does 2,000 years back not affect this?
But there would be, maybe, there is a difference, but it's like a half a degree. Bill Romaine's work would explain just exactly how that is. And these calculations, the azimuths and such, really should be done for, say, the year 150 rather than today. But it really doesn't make, a thumb's width difference on the horizon.
Yeah.
Really?
There is another long-term cycle that's not precession that will affect us. NASA's calculated that back about 12,000 years, and for the period of time that we live in, it hasn't changed less than a half a degree in the last 8,000 years. So we haven't seen any significant difference.
So these are the places I'm looking. Backside over here by Union Oda. This isn't exact, I just stuck it on there. Up here by the little schoolhouse at 104, and this is kind of the area where I shot that big sunrise that was in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's it again.
It's gorgeous.
On a different day, but here we go. Let's see if we can get this one to play.
I can hear it.
This is out in the bottom.
That's Sugarloaf again?
That's Sugarloaf.
This phenomenon has been documented in England at Avebury and incorporating Silbury Hill, where the sun will rise and look as if it's rolling up the hill.
It's pretty fun. That was a beautiful one.
So I hope you folks. Well, I think we better get home. I don't know how long we'll live, but I hope we're Good job, everybody.